This picture might be less familiar to you, but you probably all know that we have developed over the last 100 years or so the ability to take cells out of a person or cells out of an animal and keep those isolated cells alive in culture for extended periods of time. So this technology is called cell culture technology. We're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about it during the third week of the course. And by taking cells from the skin, for example, or cells from your blood, or cells from the bone marrow, and keeping them alive in culture, we've been able to study how human cells work and learn a lot about the functioning of human organism. We've also learned how to not only keep cells alive, but in certain cases make them replicate outside the body. So maybe you could take a few skin cells and keep them in culture in the right way and replicate them so that you get many millions of stem cells of skin cells after several weeks or so. Now, one of the new technologies that's evolving that we're going to talk about in the last half of the course is taking cells that have been propagated in this way outside the body and encouraging them to form new tissues. And this is one example of that. This is actually artificial skin. It's in this petri dish here is a thin membrane. It's a polymer scaffold. And on that polymer scaffold, scientists have placed some skin cells. And they've allowed it to grow. And if you maintain it in the right way, this polymer scaffold, together with the skin cells, will grow into skin. And you can use this tissue-engineered skin to treat a patient who's had severe burns, for example, or a diabetic who's developed ulcers that won't heal. And so this is an example of a technology that's just emerging now. It's certainly going to impact you in your lifetime, and we'll talk about how it works and what the current state of the art is there. This device held here is really made of mainly plastic and a little bit of metal. It's a fully implantable artificial heart, and it was introduced about 7 or 8 years ago now. It was implanted into the first patient, a gentleman in Kentucky, and he stayed alive for a period of time with this device replacing his heart. And development of an artificial heart, again, another example of biomedical engineering, is something that people have been trying to accomplish for decades now. And this is the closest that we've come. And there are many advantages of this particular artificial heart, and it's an important innovation in several different ways. And we're going to talk about this whole science of building artificial organs, devices that are made out of totally synthetic components to replace the function of your natural organs. And the artificial heart is a good example of that. Well, this picture on the bottom here is really just a series of colored dots. Some are yellow, some are red, and some are green. Does anybody know what this is? You've seen pictures like this? It's an example of a technology called a gene chip that allows you to, on each one of these spots, there is DNA, for example, that's specific for a particular gene in your genome, in the human genome, for example. And by incubating a small sample of fluid from a patient on a gene chip like this, where every one of these dots represents a different gene, you can see, by looking at the pattern of colors on this chip, which genes are being expressed and which genes are not being expressed in that particular individual. So it lets you do a profile of not just the genes that you possess, for example, but what genes are actually being used to make proteins in the cells that surround the fluid where this was collected. And so this has been a remarkable innovation. It's another example of biomedical engineering technology that allows us to look at what's happening inside an individual, a patient, in a totally different way than we were before, by looking to see not just what genes you carry, but what genes are being used at particular times in your life. And this is mainly a research tool now, but there's lots of reasons to believe that this is going to change the way that physicians practice medicine by allowing them to diagnose or predict what's going to happen to you in ways that they can't currently. And so we'll talk about technologies like this, where they're at, what the scientific basis of it is, and how they might be useful. This is an airplane. What does that have to do with biomedical engineering? Well, you could stretch it and say that, an example of engineering to improve human health is getting them from one place to another. But that would be more of a stretch than I'm going to make. But it turns out that technologies like airplanes, which were developed in the last century, have become integral parts of medicine. For example, you all know that the only treatment for some diseases is to get an organ transplant. So a kidney transplant or a liver transplant is the only life-extending intervention that can be done for some kinds of diseases. And transplants require donors. And the donor organ is usually not at the same physical location that the recipient is. Right? And so jets like this one have become very important in connecting donors to recipients. A team of surgeons is working to harvest an organ at one site, while another team of surgeons is working to prepare the recipient at another site, and the organ is flown there. Now, why does that happen? Because you have to get the organ from one place to another fast, right? The organ has to get from one place to another very rapidly, and this is the fastest way to do it. Well, what if we could develop ways using engineering techniques to extend the life of an organ so it didn't have to get where it went so quickly? Then that would open up lots of more possibilities for organ transplantation that are known now. Or what if we could figure out ways to avoid organ transplantation entirely? What if we could just take a few cells from that donor organ, ship them to the site, grow a new organ at the site, and then implant it there? And these are examples of biomedical engineering of the future that expand on what we currently use, which involves, to no small extent, technology like this. I would guess that probably 30 to 50% of you do this every day. You put a piece of plastic, a synthetic piece of plastic, into your eye to improve your vision. And contact lens technology has changed dramatically from the time that I was born to the time that you were born. And the contact lenses you use today are much different than the ones that would have been used 30 years ago. And this is biomedical engineering as well. Engineers who are developing new materials that can be, if you think about it, there's not very many things that you would want to put in your eye and that you would feel comfortable putting into your eye. So this is a very safe, a very inert material. What gives it those properties? What makes it so safe to put in one of the most sensitive places in your body, sort of in contact with your eye? Why do you have confidence putting it in contact with one of the most important organs of your body? Because you trust biomedical engineers to have done a good job in designing these things. And we'll talk about how biomaterials are designed and tested and what makes a material, the properties of a material that you could use as a contact lens. What are the properties that it needs to have?